Noah, we are back and we are looking at players to avoid and giving you players to target instead. Some of these players we don't love the value. Some of these players we don't necessarily love the situation. But all that said, we want you to like the video if you enjoy it. Leave a comment down below. Maybe some players you're avoiding. Are you more in on these players than we are? Whatever the case is, we want to hear about it. And we want to hear about it in our Discord as well. Get in that 7-day free trial, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Free trial, as I mentioned, on us. But Noah, with all the pub in the books, you are back, and you got an interesting one to talk about right off the rip here. Who are you avoiding? Who are you targeting instead? Tell me why. Tell me some costs.
Scared to mention this first name, Drake London. To get out in front of it immediately, I like Drake London. I'm excited about what he can do in a brand new offense. Zach Robinson, offensive coordinator, and Kirk Cousins throwing in the ball. I'm excited about their entire offense with Pitts and Bijan and even Mooney and Algier, honestly. But from my experiences in my leagues, trying to trade for him and also receiving a lot of offers for me to trade him away, there's been a major disparity in his value. People want to buy him because of the revamped Atlanta offense, but they're only willing to pay the price for what he has shown us so far, which, in fairness, has been somewhat underwhelming. The issue is that London owners are also excited about the hype and aren't willing to sell for the appropriate price. I'm avoiding Drake London because everything involving him for me lately has ultimately been a waste of time. If you receive a good offer, though, I'm all for it. Once again, this has nothing to do with who I believe is actually a really good player. It's all about the current market.
Noah, I think you touched on a great point here. Sometimes the value just doesn't make sense. It's too much. And it's better to look in other directions where you can find similar production and upside as somebody in Drake London that's just a little bit easier to acquire. And I think that's what you've done here with your target in mind, aside from Drake London. I think it's a good pick. Who do you got?
Right now, I would rather be targeting Devonta Smith as opposed to Drake London. And that's because Devonta Smith has been in the league for 3 years now. And in those 3 years, he's finished wide receiver 30, wide receiver 9, and wide receiver 19. His most recent finish as the mid-range wide receiver 2 at 19 is his most impressive to me, given his massive shift in the offensive tempo that the Eagles had in the first half of their games compared to 2022. If you'll remember, the Eagles in 2022, a lot of the time would get way ahead of their opponents in the first half, and then they would really take their foot off the gas in the second half, and they would control the game pretty dominantly. That was not the same case in 2023. So that being said, that being the case, them having not Shane Steichen as the offensive coordinator, it also led to them having a significantly lower tempoed offense. Now, it still was pretty high up in the league as far as tempo goes, but it was nothing like it was last year. If I remember the time right, I want to say it was like 25 seconds per play in 2022 compared to 29 seconds per play in 2023, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's actually pretty noticeable in the middle of a game. Even with that super bland offense in 2023, both him and A.J. Brown both managed top 24 finishes. There's no reason for me to believe that Devonta can't keep being a premier set and forget top 24 receiver. So with that in mind, I will happily buy him for less than what I know I would have to pay for Drake London right now. And I think that you could probably buy Devonta Smith for Tank Dell in the 2025 second.
I don't hate that value. I think some people might go for that. It kind of depends on what side of the fence you are with Tank Dell right now, with Stephon Diggs coming to town, how you feel about that. But to counter your thought here, if I was trying to give away Devonta Smith for something, I like the thought of getting a pick back, but can I get a wide receiver like Jackson Smith and Jigba? I know you're a Seahawks fan, so that might be a little difficult. Or can I get Dalton Kincaid? I know there's two players that are primed, or at least Dalton Kincaid is certainly primed for a better situation. JSN kind of in the same boat, maybe a better offensive coordinator situation. I might have to demote that pick to a 25 third, but would you be willing to send one of those players instead of Tank Dell for the cost of Devonta Smith to get him off my roster onto yours and into your wide receiver 2 or 3 slot?
I would absolutely switch it out for either of those players. Because me personally, I think that Tank Dell in the public eye for most people, from what I still see, is still valued higher than JSN
Sure.
for what the flashes we did see in 2023. So yeah, I would absolutely go for that.
All right. I love it. We'll call it a done deal. And that's what we're looking to do here. Get some deals done. And that's what we're trying to do in the Discord as well. Like I said at the top of the video, pop in there if you haven't already. Get in on that 7-day free trial. But with that said, I will roll right on into my next one. My avoid for me, and this again is somewhat rooted in the value that you talked about, Noah. Devon Achane, keep trade cut, running back 7, Dynasty Rewind ADP of running back 8 at this point. Is a little rich for me for a guy who, albeit on a points per game basis, lit up the world last year, had a 50 some point game or whatever it was against Denver, that just, crazy game. And then outside of that, though, left you wanting a lot more. There were definitely some other good games in there too. I'm not going to say that, but he did miss significant time last year as well. The value is the issue, especially considering the running backs that are valued around him at this point. And that's the big thing to keep in mind. If you already have him, I think he's worth rostering. I think he's worth utilizing as a flex piece, a running back 3 on your team. Although I would look to add somebody as my primary running back 2 that's a little more reliable or a little less likely to miss some time due to injury or be kind of maybe game script dependent or whatever the case is. Somebody who's going to be more featured in offense, doesn't have competition for work in the backfield like Raheem Mostert. They drafted Jalen Wright. Not that I think he's going to get a ton of work this year. I think he's more the succession plan to Raheem Mostert at some point. Not saying that is going to be a 1-for-1 replacement, but that's I think that's estate planning more than it is planning for right now. Raheem Mostert's still there. Got to keep that in mind. And that is going to limit Devon Achane's upside. But the fact of the matter is, Devon Achane isn't designed to be a bell cow running back anyway, which is okay. We don't need to have a bell cow running back to be a good running back in fantasy. Should also give him a better chance to stay healthier, as opposed to if they're just going to try to bang him between the tackles every single play, he is not making it through a season. And, even if they don't do that, he might not make it through a season. So if I'm looking at a running back at this cost, I don't want to be left dealing with workload concerns and health concerns on top of it. So at this cost, I'd rather have somebody like Travis Etienne or Saquon Barkley, players who I think are shockingly similar values, despite being very entrenched in the roles that they have. Travis Etienne, they draft Tank Bigsby last year, a whole hullabaloo of Tank's going to take more work than he did. And they're still saying that Tank's going to get more work this year and hopefully, let Travis Etienne breathe a little bit. But Saquon Barkley has no competition in that backfield. They might give some spell work to anybody back there, but either which way, these are 2 guys that I know are locked into work and have more prototypical frames to handle the wear and tear of the position. Saquon Barkley especially looks to be in a better offense than Achane, or I would think at worst as good. One thing we forgot to mention, Kellen Moore coming into that offense should be extremely helpful for Devonta Smith as well. Something to be thinking about. But so with that said, all this thoughts in the books. Noah, can I send you somebody like James Cook plus a 25 third for Saquon Barkley? If you're still looking to compete and eat that running back, maybe you want to diversify, get a little younger, get a little pick action coming back your way. Maybe you're trying to retool out of the running back position. You somehow have just great running back depth and you're looking to get rid of it at this point in the offseason. Can I send you somebody like DK Metcalf straight up for Saquon Barkley? Or maybe would you consider something along the lines of a Saquon Barkley plus a third for Zay Flowers plus a second, again, retooling that position a little bit. So are any of these deals ones you would consider for trying to get Saquon Barkley off of your roster? What are you thinking here?
In a retool situation, a rebuild situation, I'm looking at this old but good running back that's not going to serve me very well for the long-term future, even the short term, if we're talking just a year, even 2 years from now. I definitely want to get out of Barkley, and I love both of the options that you put up here. I would 100% take DK Metcalf for Barkley, and I would go for the Zay Flowers in a second, for Barkley in a third as well. I would definitely do both of those. The only thing I would say to the other one, if I was still looking to compete, I would be a little bit more hesitant to part ways with Saquon. And so while I think James Cook and a pick is a good tear down from Barkley, if I was going to tear down and I was still looking to compete, I think it would have to be a 25 second.
I think that's fair enough to ask for, and I think that's fair enough for the transition. So I'm willing to make all these deals. No, I'm willing to kick that 25 third up to a 25 second. Let's call her a day. Move her along again. Another deal in the books, and that's exactly what we're looking to do here. Noah, you got a very good one here. Honestly, whichever side of the fence I'm on with this player, if I have him holding, not trying to make any deals, for cheap. But if I don't have him, I'm not dying to go get him. Who do you got here?
So, something a common thread among a lot of these players we're avoiding is hype or something that's putting this player in the forefront of people's minds. And right now, one of those guys is Rashee Rice, wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. So similar but different from my take with London. Rice's value is just way too volatile for me right now, but not due to his on-field surroundings like maybe it would be with London, but rather his off-field drama. And this isn't me trying to place an indictment on Rice, but you assuredly cannot sell him for the right value right now. And I doubt that you can buy him for a price that you feel like you're comfortable with. And while I don't personally think that his off-field concerns will be long-term, he's just not a player that I want to do anything with right now, just like what you were saying. I don't want to buy him or sell him. That sounds like another headache to me, honestly. So instead of Rashee Rice, Terry McLaurin. Terry has posted 4 straight 120 plus target seasons and 1,000 yard seasons. And given last year, I think it was like 1,002 if you're looking at weeks 1 through 17, but it still hits the mark. So, and he has done that with what I would consider to be, and what I think a lot would consider to be suboptimal surroundings in Washington. And I'm not saying there's no risk to Terry, as entirely new settings. He has a new head coach, a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator, a new GM, still a pretty new owner, an owner who just had his first full offseason with the team. It doesn't guarantee great results all the time, even when coming from some of the worst settings, which is definitely true of the Commanders in recent history. I understand the hesitation with this that someone might have, given that there is a 5-year age gap between Rice and Terry. But if I'm trying to win now, I think this is a great pivot option, especially if you're a believer in Jaden Daniels, who did post a 72% completion percentage in his last collegiate season at NFL or in college. And I think that was good for top 10, pretty comfortably top 10 of the Power 5 quarterbacks last year. And I do know he was throwing to Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., and it's college versus NFL. I completely get that. But you compare that to Sam Howell's 63% from last season, which I think was 22nd best in the league for starting quarterbacks, or quarterbacks who played at least 10 games, because we know how much quarterback turnover there was last season. It's pretty good. Terry had the 44th best catchable target rate from Sam Howell last season, and seasons before that haven't been much better. And to me, any boost to that puts Terry right back into that mid wide receiver 2 range again. And I bet you didn't know this, he only had 10 fewer fantasy points than Rice last year. As far as a cost goes, it's kind of difficult for me. You could probably buy both of these guys for an early second right now. They both have a nearly identical value according to Fantasy Calc's database, but that's probably exactly what I would offer for Terry. Probably like the 204 for this year, or if I wanted to go a little bit further down the road, and if I'm competing again, like I said in this scenario, I would throw my 25 second, hopefully it's late, and the 4th for next season.
Yeah, I think both these values are pretty fair for Terry McLaurin. I think if I was a retooling team looking to pivot, this is a move I could make. Even if I was trying to be competitive this year, my rookie draft hasn't happened yet. Selling Terry for the 204, I'm going to have a lot more takers for that 204 if I want to pivot off Terry for whatever reason than I would moving Terry for whatever player I'm trying to get. So the 204 just naturally has more pick appeal because there's a lot more players that you can nab with that pick. So it's more inviting and more interesting to people who may want to purchase it. But I like this value. And with what you said about Rice too, if you are looking to compete, probably not a great option for you to be looking at, considering with his suspension up in the air anyway. I guess you could probably put in the argument of like, well, if you're able to get him for a 25 second and he's just, extra when he comes back anyway, fine. Like I don't hate that value. I don't hate that cost. I think that's relatively fair. But that's kind of where I'm at. But realistically, at the end of the day, I wouldn't advise anybody to sell Rice for that cost. So it's hard for me to imagine. I know we've seen trades happen in our Discord for Rice buying him that cheaply.
Yeah.
So I know it's happening out there. You can go on Fantasy Calc Trades database. You can see these trades happening for Rashee Rice going very cheaply. But I can't advise anybody to sell him. But if you can get him at that low cost of like a mid-second or a future second, I don't hate that by any stretch of the imagination, but either which way, love this point here. We got a deal, happily sending either way. If I'm competitive, like I said, I have faith that I can turn that 204 into something for a future 25 second and a fourth. Maybe I'm only taking that if I'm trying to retool and maybe try to rebuild going forward. But 100% agree too that Terry McLaurin is a pretty undervalued asset. I think coming into this season has always been relatively or very steady Eddie. I mean, never fewer than like 12.9 fantasy points per game, never more than 14.3 fantasy points per game. Not elite numbers by any stretch of the imagination, but on a points per game basis, those are numbers that you can put into a flex 2 or flex 1 even, and be pretty happy with the results at the end of the week when you're hopefully winning more matchups than you're losing. With that said, I will roll right on into my next one, and I am avoiding one of the rookie darlings from last year that I think people are mostly cool on, but maybe not as cool as they should be. I'm avoiding Jordan Addison with this one. And, I did some number crunching this afternoon, had some free time. I was bored. I was like, here's some players I want to avoid. This is somebody that came up. Why do I want to avoid Jordan Addison? Looking at wide receivers over the last 3 seasons who finished the year as the 3rd receiving target on their team, that includes running backs, wideouts, tight ends, anybody who's catching the ball. 53 wide receivers fit this criteria. It's not, 32 teams times 3 because there are some teams whose 3rd wide receiver target was the tight end or the running back. So Jordan Addison, among those 53 wide receivers, ranked number 1 in the last 3 seasons with 13.01 fantasy points per game and a wide receiver 31 finish in points per game in 2023. Obviously, it helps not having Justin Jefferson for a good chunk of the year, TJ Hawkinson for a good chunk of the year, and putting up a whopping 10 touchdowns on only 108 targets, which is pretty unheard of. And just to kind of back that up, there is another anomaly on this list as well. Cortland Sutton, 10 touchdowns on 90 targets. What just an absolute stud to have in your lineup. But then you get into the realistic side of the world and other wideouts that had 10 touchdowns or more. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 10 touchdowns on 164 targets compared to Jordan Addison's 108. CeeDee Lamb with 13 touchdowns on 181 targets compared to Jordan Addison's 108. Mike Evans with 13 touchdowns on 136 targets. Tyreek Hill with 13 touchdowns on 171 targets. So very clear that the touchdowns are very inflated for Addison, especially as a rookie. That's pretty rare to do too. So yes, he had a good year as a rookie, but a lot of this was because of the fact that, having your top other 2 receivers miss time, and on a points or on a targets per game basis, Justin Jefferson and Hawkinson were still well ahead of Jordan Addison. The average PPR fantasy points per game for players that fit this criteria, looking at it again, last 3 seasons, wide receivers who finished the year as a 3rd receiving target on their team on a per game basis, average PPR fantasy points per game for those players is 8.58 fantasy points. In 2023, that would be good for wide receiver 62 in points per game. 2022, wide receiver 61 in points per game. 2021, wide receiver 67 in points per game. So it's a rough slope for those guys. And Jordan Addison fits that build, currently valued as a wide receiver 26 in Dynasty Rewind ADP, currently wide receiver 22 on Keep Trade Cut. While I think he'll still be able to manage a wide receiver 3-ish finish on the season, thanks to TJ Hawkinson's delayed or slower return. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with him. Addison is a massive avoid for me right now, and an even bigger sell later candidate if you have him before Hawk returns fully. Not to mention the downgrade of Kirk Cousins to JJ McCarthy, who we've seen struggle some in rookie camp. Not that we should always, rookie camp doesn't mean everything, or OTAs doesn't mean everything, but it is something out there that, hey, in general, you have to imagine that the rookie quarterback is not going to be as good as Kirk Cousins has been the last several seasons. Some seasons putting up, having 2 receiver ones or wide receiver ones in scoring. I just don't think you're going to get that out of JJ McCarthy, at least not year 1. And definitely not out of Sam Darnold, as fine as he's been systematically, sometimes on occasion, I guess you could say. So somebody I'd rather have than Jordan Addison is somebody who finished very close to Jordan Addison last year, was wide receiver 31 on a points per game basis. I apologize. He was, wide receiver 30 on a points per game basis, was Zay Flowers, locked into the number 2 receiver role at worst on his own team, locked in with a quarterback throwing him the ball when he's healthy. Lamar Jackson, obviously reigning MVP at this point, but someone who I believe I can expect more consistency from and has more ceiling because he's the 2nd receiving option in the offense for the entire season, no matter what. If Mark Andrews were to miss time, he's the number 1. So as long as everybody's healthy, though, he's the number 2. I know, in a previous point, Noah, I offered the case of selling you Zay Flowers. But hey, just because we're selling players doesn't mean we don't like them, doesn't mean we think they're bad. But I know I tried selling you Zay Flowers earlier, but it's the offseason and I'm bored anyway, and this is in a different league. So what if I sent you DJ Moore or Tank Dell for Zay Flowers? Or could I send Kyle Pitts and a third for Zay Flowers and a second? Thoughts to be had on these offers, Noah, for Zay Flowers?
It's kind of a tough one because I like Zay Flowers. I like the offense he's in, like his offense coordinator, I like his quarterback. I like basically everything about the Ravens, and I liked a lot of what I saw out of Zay last season. DJ Moore and Tank Dell, I probably wouldn't do Tank Dell straight up. Honestly, DJ Moore straight up. If they hadn't just drafted Rome Odunze, I would be really tempted to that. But I don't think I could do either of those. I think that I would need at least a third back. Not much, but just something. Okay. Or, somebody could talk me into it, I guess. But I think that that's really close either way. The Kyle Pitts one, I am all the way out on, unless there's a pretty big tight end premium one there.
Okay.
For me, if we're assuming no tight end premium,
sure,
I have Zay Flowers above Kyle Pitts, a second, and with Zay Flowers for Kyle Pitts and a third. I would like that better if it was flipped. If it was Kyle Pitts, if you could send me Kyle Pitts in a second, I would give you Zay Flowers in a third, but not the other way around.
I think I'd be more willing at that point to do one of the other wideouts plus a third for Zay Flowers. I think we can get that deal done. But I agree. I think those two are very close, and that's why I put them on the sheet, because I think they're close values. So I think we'll call that first two a done deal, DJ Moore or Tank Dell. Take your pick your poison, I guess, plus a third. I'll take Zay Flowers. And you got another void here, Noah. I like this one a good bit. I have my rose-colored lenses on for this player a little bit, but I want to hear this one. I'm interested.
I'm avoiding Justin Herbert. And once again, it's not because I dislike the player. I like the player. I was excited for Justin Herbert coming out of Oregon, him coming out, being drafted right behind Tua to the Dolphins. Very excited about it. I still like Herbert. Counter to my usual analytical stances, I'm pretty down on Herbert due to the foreboding nature of his team's moves this offseason. They hired a run-first head coach, a run-first offensive coordinator. They drafted an offensive tackle with their 5th overall pick, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, it's never a bad thing to draft a really good offensive tackle, but they could have added an electrifying wide receiver in Malik Neighbors, who went to the Giants with the very next pick after theirs, and they could have been adding him to an otherwise dead wide receiver room, or at least it was at the time of that pick. They did add Ladd McConkey later on, and I think that can be a good addition for Herbert. And I'm not the biggest believer in Ladd for fantasy, but I think he can be a great NFL receiver. Maybe he can be great for fantasy. Herbert has done well with what he's had, but now it has become drastically worse. Him being valued higher than this guy I would rather have feels a little off. And that being said, I would rather have Kyler Murray at value right now. Kyler has battled injuries the past couple of years, and that has understandably dropped his value and scared fantasy players off. But when he has played, his efficiency stats haven't been too dissimilar to Herbert's. And I reference rbsdm.com, EPA and CPOE metrics filter out 20% garbage time. That's what I'm looking at when I look at that. His rushing ability is in question, which is a big thing of who Kyler Murray is or who he was following these injuries. But he's also been a good passer, and I think people have kind of forgotten about that. I think when people identify a quarterback as a rushing quarterback, they kind of throw out their passing ability, and they don't really think about it. Can they run or can they not run? And now he's throwing to Marvin Harrison Jr., an emergent tight end, and Trey McBride, and an underrated Michael Wilson. If he can stay healthy, I would love to buy Kyler for a 25 first and Michael Pittman.
That's a tough one. Zach will love that you threw Michael Wilson in here. He's a huge Michael Wilson guy. But this is tough. And the reason why it's tough, I don't hate the value. I think it's okay. If I had 3 quarterbacks already on my Superflex roster, I'm probably looking at this and saying, probably, unless Kyler's my wide receiver or my quarterback one. I'll get to the position eventually if I rotate through enough of them. But I think my counter to this one would be, instead of Michael Pittman, could I help you upgrade one of your quarterbacks? Maybe upgrade one of your quarterbacks. Can I get Jared Goff back instead of Michael Pittman on this deal? That's where I think my first counter would be. I see you got Jared Goff chilling. He's your quarterback 2. You're trying to get a better quarterback 2 out of this. You want Kyler Murray off my roster. Can I get Jared Goff and that first round pick back for you for Kyler?
That's a tough one considering the massive vote of confidence the Lions just put in Jared Goff. On most teams, I'm really happy. Jared Goff is my QB2. 25 first and Jared Goff would probably be difficult for me purely because there is still some questions for Kyler Murray. If we didn't have some of those questions, I think I would really be on it. But that on top of Goff already having been one of my more favorite value quarterbacks, I don't think I could get that one done.
What if I sent back to smooth over your concerns? What if I threw on a 25 second along with Kyler Murray? So you get Kyler Murray and a 25 second for Jared Goff and a 25 first. Are you more in on that deal?
That would be a lot closer. I would definitely have to evaluate where I think I am as a team. If I think I'm like right on the cusp of being competitive and I want to take a risk with the higher upside quarterback than the higher floor quarterback, I think I would do that for sure.
All right. Fair enough. I like it. And I did want to ask one follow-up question. I know you're avoiding Justin Herbert now, and I don't hate any of the points you brought up. I tend to agree. I think he should be a little bit lesser value, but I still think he needs to be respected as a top quarterback. Like you said, we've seen him do a lot of very good things. But with where his value is now, all these questions coming to light, do you think he's just going to end up being a better buy later, as opposed to like avoid him for now, let his value sink a little bit with this rough season, let them get this wide receiver room wrangled in that much more over another season? Do you think that's something that could happen down the line where Justin Herbert's more of a value later than he is now?
Yeah, and that really applies to all of my avoids on this list. It's an avoid for now. It's not an avoid forever.
Sure.
Like I said, I like these I'm not the hugest Rashee Rice fan on the field, but we're not talking about that. I like London. I like Herbert. I don't like them right now. Doesn't mean I can't like them later. It's just all based on the times that we're living in right now. And so,
Sure.
yes, I would definitely be down for that. I think that this is a perfect opportunity to maybe sell a little high on them and then buy a little bit lower on them later. But I also wouldn't fault anybody on wanting to hold him right now too, which
Sure.
again is why he's an avoid for me. But yeah, I would definitely be into him later on.
And I think that's an awesome thing you noted. Avoid for now does not mean avoid forever. Keeping these players on the table at all times. And again, keeping that thing that we always hold true. We don't hate players, we hate values. The values change, a heck of a lot quicker than players' talent and situation does. At the end of the day, I love that point that you brought up there. And I got my last avoid here, and this is one I've been struggling with, and I talked about it with Mike in a video earlier this week. Talking this Titans offense, I'm avoiding Will Levis here, but really I'm avoiding this entire offense, and that's because, with Will Levis, there's another player who I think we both like a good bit, who's valued similarly to Will Levis right now. But either which way, Will Levis is the avoid for me. But really, this entire Titans offense, I'm really just not sold on Will Levis, and that's where it stems from. That's why I'm starting with Will Levis as my primary avoid. And I honestly haven't been since he was a prospect, since he slid into day two. Day two quarterbacks percentage is not good at the end of the day of them hitting for whatever reason, whether it's, team commitment. Hey, they're just not that good. They were that low on teams' boards for a reason. Whatever the case is, it doesn't help that after his 4-touchdown debut, he went on to throw for a total of 4 more touchdowns in his next full 7 games. There was an 8th game where he left early for a whopping 1.8% passing touchdown percentage. I know that'll fluctuate year to year with quarterbacks, but league average is like 3.5 to 4%. So this is paltry numbers. And I'll be the first to admit that his passing weapons weren't the best last year, but thankfully they've added Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd to help in this department. Still not super sold on that offense with new head coach and presumed play caller coming in, and Bill Callahan, I believe is the name. Last year, looking to their offensive line wasn't great by any stretch, and they lost some of their primary starters, but replaced two of them with Lloyd Cushenberry at center, which I think is pretty much a one-for-one replacement to Andrew Brewer, I want to say is the name that they lost. And then they drafted J.C. Latham at left tackle with their first-round pick. And I think, as good as I think J.C. Latham can be, rookie left tackle, not always a recipe for success, especially on a team that might be a little sus. But most notably, and somebody who I probably should have mentioned earlier when it, comes to losses last year, maybe the strength of their entire team and offense in general, not being able to lean on the run game with Derrick Henry anymore and being replaced by Tony Pollard, which anybody will say is a downgrade. No matter how much, anybody ever wants to argue that Derrick Henry is trending down or anything like that, it's a downgrade going to Tony Pollard from Derrick Henry. It's an objective matter of fact. But I'll admit too, hey, when you look at this offense, there's probably some decent value buys for a 1 year, 2 year run, 1 to 2 year rental for some of these guys. But fact of the matter is, this entire offense could be turned over very, very quickly. And any of the assets you acquire in the interim don't do much for you and don't necessarily last, or could necessarily not last. Just looking at this offense right now, DeAndre Hopkins, cut candidate. He has void years after 2024. Tyler Boyd on a 1 year deal, free agent after the 24 season. Calvin Ridley, a very high probability cap casualty, I would say, after the 2025 season. Tony Pollard, same deal, cap casualty after 2025. They save a boatload of money with post June 1 cuts for those guys. Chig Okonkwo on the end of his rookie deal after the 2025 season. Will Levis, free agent after 26, along with Tyjae Spears, free agent after the 26 season. I honestly look at this offense, and I don't think they have any of their set pieces for the long run. I think they've done well on the offensive line the last 2 years, building some building blocks around them. And ultimately, I think they've given Will Levis just enough to see if he can be their future. Because they've given him just enough wide receiver talent, because, hey, you have D-Hop, you have Calvin Ridley, you have Tony Pollard there, you have Tyler Boyd, you have experienced veterans around you. Can you put it together with this? Because if you can't put it together with this, there's no chance you're going to put it together with a rookie team that is, not going to be perfect running routes, not going to be perfect knowing their assignments and things like that. So I think very quickly we'll know if Will Levis is going to be the guy. And I just don't want to buy in on anybody that could be, that's, if I'm buying in on somebody, I'm not always necessarily saying, hey, I'm married to this person for X time. But I don't want that time to have come with an expiration date. I don't want to spend assets that way. That's just not something I want to do. But at this value, Will Levis is valued as a quarterback 22 right now. Bryce Young, valued as a quarterback 20 on Keep Trade Cut. Very close value, similar tiers. And I just much rather go grab and invest in Bryce Young and or the pieces of the Carolina offense, throwing that into the entire discussion. And I never thought I'd be saying this anytime soon, but Carolina seems to be turning things around with hiring Dave Canales, a guy who's been a great offensive coordinator, made Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield very wealthy men, and now has a quote-unquote abundance of riches. I put here, and I said maybe that's too far with this Carolina offense. He definitely has a better quarterback, though. But with the additions of Deontay Johnson, Jonathan Brooks, Xavier Legette, and Jatavion Sanders, they've added weapons for Bryce Young across the board. And one thing we like to say or note, when a team has weapons and good weapons or is building around an offense, and I know I just highlighted all the weapons that they put around Will Levis, I believe in Bryce Young a heck of a lot more than I believe in Will Levis. But when you have the nice pieces, go get the quarterback that's throwing to him. That's what I want to do. I know you're a Bryce Young fan, Noah, but would you be willing to swap my Baker Mayfield plus a 25 second for a Bryce Young, possibly a 25 third kickback? Are we close on that deal at all? Do you need more of a pick on that exchange?
First of all, there is a reason that Bryce Young was the number 1 overall pick and Will Levis didn't go until the second round. Second, as long as I am not in a clear rebuilding situation, I will strongly consider this deal. If I'm somebody that maybe isn't quite as confident about Bryce Young's, potential right now, I think that I would really think about it. My only pause on this really is the fact that part of what I think has made Baker so successful is who we now think might be making Bryce Young successful. That being said, I think this is really close. If I'm involved in the trade, I want Bryce in the third, but I think that there are plenty of people who go for Baker in a second. That's where I stand. I probably wouldn't do this, but I think there's a lot of people who would.
Yeah, I think looking at the market, it looks like not a lot of Bryce Young fans out there anymore. As much as he was a relatively early pick last year, and admittedly he played pretty poorly, and I 100% I don't think it's him. You know, you look at the vanilla-ness of that offense last year was just god awful. Not a lot of, motion, not a lot of play action, not a lot of RPO stuff that in today's modern NFL has become somewhat of a staple. And I mean, it was just like non-existent last year. And when they did implement that stuff, Bryce Young shockingly played a heck of a lot better. And most of his best statistics, best games came in those situations where those were a little more utilized. So I'm in on Bryce Young. I think this does probably intrigue. At worst, I think this intrigues enough people to, maybe that gets massaged. Maybe you're, moving up picks around a little differently. Maybe it's a Mayfield and a first for Bryce Young and a second, something like that. Maybe that's something that gets done instead. I think enough people are in on this enough to be considerate of it, especially depending on when you get into the conversation of mixing up team trajectories and things like that. If one's a rebuilding team, one's a competitive team, they don't want to deal with the question marks or the headaches that Bryce Young could offer, but they're more willing to buy in on Baker Mayfield, what he did last year and how he's ultimately has been kind of a chameleon in offenses wherever he goes. He's been able to be good enough to be annoying and keep a starting job and get paid. That's got to stand for something. And we got to stand for something, but we also got to get the heck on out of here. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Comment down below. What players are you avoiding? What did you think of the list we provided? What do you think of the targets we provided? And what did you think of those trades that we put together? But if you want to talk that much more about putting trades together, there's two ways to do it. Check out the Patreon Discord, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in there for a free 7-day trial and check out the roster review option in the pinned comment below in the YouTube description as well. Take a look at your teams and give you a boatload of trade suggestions, roster construction suggestions, how to attack your build. But with that said, Noah and I are going to get the heck on out of here. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.
Beautiful.
Good stuff, Noah, as I throw my pen on the floor.